All right, take three. Welcome to Critical Weight Theory. And today we're heading back to Oz. But this is not the Oz of ruby slippers and yellow brick roads. This is the Oz in Times Square. Oz with memory loss, magical keys, and Christopher Lloyd chewing the scenery as the wizard. So, yes, we're talking about The Witches of Oz, also known as Dorothy and the Witches of Oz. It's a 2011 sci fi miniseries that was later cut down into a feature film in 2012. And it's one of those projects that tries very hard to grow up with its audience, whether or not it quite pulls that off. So let's talk about what this thing is, what it's trying to do, and why it still has a strange little place in modern Oz adaptations. So, setting the stage here, The Witches of Oz started life as a two-part TV miniseries on sci fi, very much in the same vein as their earlier Tin Man miniseries from 2007. And later, the footage was recut into a 101-minute theatrical version called Dorothy and the Witches of Oz. So, I don't know which version you really want to focus on the most, but you have options. And the longer miniseries version runs closer to 3 hours, depending on the release, and includes earlier versions of the special effects. Both versions were directed by Lee Scott, who at the time was known for these direct to video genre films, including work for The Asylum, the same company that created the magnificent Sharknado franchise. Ooh. So I especially like Sharknado 2, the second one. But what about this movie? Well, the pitch was clear: take L. Frank Baum's Oz books and drop them into the modern world. Make Dorothy an adult, make it darker, louder, more serious. Basically, take the Wizard of Oz and ask, what if this was made after Once Upon a Time and Stephen King's It? So in this version, Dorothy Gale is no longer a farm girl from Kansas. She's a grown woman living in Kansas, now a wildly successful children's book author. And her books are about, you guessed it, Oz, the land of Oz. And here's the twist, well, spoiler alert, if you will. The books are not fiction. Dorothy's adventures in Oz really happened. She just doesn't remember them. Her memories were suppressed, locked away somewhere between childhood trauma and magical intervention. And the stories she writes actually come from fragments that she doesn't consciously recognize. So when Dorothy moves to present day New York City to finish her latest book, things start to unravel. Magic starts to leak into the real world. Oz isn't sealed off anymore. And then the Wicked Witch of the West shows up in Times Square. Along with her allies, the witch is planning global domination because, of course, she is. That's what witches do. Dorothy is pulled back into a world that she barely remembers and has to reclaim her identity and unlock the secrets of a magical book and a key, and accept that Oz never really let her go. So, as far as the cast and characters, one of the big selling points of this project was its cast. Dorothy Gale is played by Polly Rojas, who carries most of the emotional weight of the story. Her Dorothy is, a little bit confused, defensive, and clearly unsettled by the idea that her entire career is based on forgotten truth. Then you have Christopher Lloyd, who, of course, most people recognize from the Back to the Future trilogy, but he plays the wizard, and he's getting into the humbug side of the character, really. It's theatrical, exaggerated, and very Christopher Lloyd. He's full of that Christopher Lloyd quality. I suppose you could say he embodies the Christopher Lloydness of the character. And then you've got Billy Boyd as Nick Chopper, aka the Tin Man, Sean Astin as Frack, Lance Henriksen is in here as Uncle Henry. You have Mia Sara as Princess Langwidere or Langvidere. I probably mispronounced that, but anyway, you've also got Jeffrey Combs as Frank, so he's in here too. So it's an ensemble pulled from genre favorites, and you can tell the marketing uh, relied on that fact too, you know. So the miniseries was filmed in Connecticut and New York City. I guess it started back in late 2009, from what I gather, and it was designed first for television, which explains the uneven pacing when it's recut into the feature film version. And the theatrical version trims a lot of material and adds a post credit scene teasing sequels that, as far as I know, have never materialized. Now, maybe there's something I'm missing here. Let me know if there was a sequel to this that I'm not aware of, but I'm pretty sure there wasn't. And the Wicked Witch's hands are clawing up from the darkness, which are meant to suggest that the story isn't over. It very much was, however, you know, as far as I know. And still, you can feel the ambition here that this wasn't meant to be a cheap parody. It was marketed as a more adult oriented Oz story, one that assumed viewers had grown up with the original and were ready for something, you know, a little bit new and stranger. So this isn't a cozy movie exactly, or it's not really intended to be. It seems like it's, you know, meant to be a little bit serious and dark. So you know, it was sort of doomed to fail for some viewers who will immediately dismiss those types of vibes, and you know, they will hyper focus on whether or not it lives up to those expectations. And unlike the 1939 classic, The Witches of Oz places magic directly into our world, and Oz doesn't feel distant or dreamlike. It feels more invasive, you know? And the story relies on themes of memory and identity, like I mentioned. Dorothy isn't just saving the world, therefore, she's trying to understand who she really is and whether her success can, uh, well, for one thing, happen, but you know, whether her success came from imagination or stolen history. You know, she's wondering, like, does her life story even really exist? You know, it's a bit like the Matrix. You know, what is real, what is not. So, or the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, I suppose, if you want. There's a little bit of a what is the nature of reality kind of vibe that results from all of these of sorts of memory lapses and things. There's also a constant tension between destiny and choice. Dorothy did not ask to be a hero, but Oz doesn't care. And that's kind of an interesting idea, even if the execution is uneven. So the response to The Witches of Oz was mixed to negative overall. You won't find that many positive, glowing reviews of this. And you know, it's a little bit sad, you know, as somebody who, you know, is a creative person overall. Um, I like it when people succeed and they create good content that people love, and it's always a little bit sad to me when people had good intentions, but then they just weren't particularly successful. And audience scores hover in the low 40% range. IMDb ratings are similarly divided, and critics pointed out the low budget effects, the strange pacing, and the tonal confusion. So that's actually a pretty regular feature of a lot of sci fi movies. And I don't mean sci fi the genre, although of course that can be true, but I mean sci fi channel series, you know, the TV channel. And the Asylum has a lot of that kind of stuff going on. They don't always have the greatest effects, you know. I mean, to be honest, I assume they try, but they're not always very successful. And like the Sharknado franchise, for example, those movies are successful, partially because the wild idea, but also because there's a bit of novelty with the effects not being perfect. They wink at the audience, and this movie, it seems like it doesn't wink quite as heavily at the audience. I'm sure there might be somebody out there who disagrees, and they'll possibly say that, oh, this movie wasn't taking itself that seriously and all that, but it seems like it was intended to be a little bit above just being a silly Billy kind of movie. So there's a little bit of that tonal confusion and strange pacing and whatnot. And some viewers enjoy the creative risks that this movie takes, and also the cast. So you will find at least some positive reviews from individual viewers. It's something you can put on and enjoy without overthinking necessarily. Even though I think the story and the people behind it want you to think about it, but it's something you can just put on and maybe even fall asleep to or something like that. And it can be it's a little bit of a sloppy movie and potentially exhausting, like if you're trying to take it seriously. And it might be good for older kids who are looking for you know an Oz story that has some intensity, but that's not like too crazy and violent or whatever. And this this didn't make it to many best of lists. I'll just put it like that. It never became the cult hit that sci-fi may have hoped for. So, The Witches of Oz, it isn't really a hidden gem, but it's an interesting attempt to modernize one of America's most beloved stories. And it asks what happens when childhood fantasy collides with adult reality, when a fairy tale refuses to stay buried, and when the land of Oz doesn't care whether you're ready to come back and just, you know, takes you into its world. So, if you're curious about strange adaptations, ensemble heavy fantasy, or the long traditions of reworking Oz for new generations, this one is worth a look, especially if you're like a completist of the Wizard of Oz universe. Like, if you want to see everything that's out there, well, this would obviously be a good place to go. And I gotta say, just don't expect it to dazzle you like a pair of ruby slippers. So, all right, that's it for this episode. Hopefully, you like it. I don't know if you might agree with my assessment of the movie or the miniseries or whatever. And if you don't agree with me, well, you're wrong. I'm just kidding. Anyway, have a good day.